I did send the public comment sheet around again. It hasn't come back to me, so if anyone signed up at the last minute, I don't currently have you on the list. But I'm gonna start with the first person on our list, and that is Tara. Please introduce yourself. We'll get you a microphone.
Thanks.
Introduce yourself for the record and where you're from.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Carter, members of OPEC. My name is Tara Brock with the Pew Charitable Trust. We would like to provide a few comments to you today on Part 3, the Rocky Shores Management Strategy Update, and the red line version that you have in front of you. First, I'd like to offer some specific edits to help strengthen some of the policies in that document. So if you're following along on page 8, specifically policy G, we would like to see strengthened slightly from currently having managed agencies considering the long-term conservation of rocky habitats in administering regulations, permits, and other agreements, and instead have managing agencies be required to avoid impacts to rocky habitats in administering regulations, permits, and other agreements. Similarly, under policy I, we would suggest replacing the word minimize with avoid, in that harvesting, gathering, or scientific collection of marine plants and animals in rocky habitat areas shall be conducted in a manner that avoids impacts and disturbance to habitats or other organisms. And we believe this really can help strengthen those policies to first avoid these impacts, and then if avoidance is not possible, minimize, and finally then mitigate if not possible to minimize. We would also support and recommend the addition of a management principle under page 4 that would require managing rocky areas with a precautionary approach. In the face of uncertainty or lack of scientific data, protection of these areas should be the default. We would also like to see the strategy make clear the role of managing agencies in assessing and recommending changes to site designations based on the best available science. We do strongly support the public proposal process, but our state agencies have a responsibility to ensure management in these areas is adequate, and these agencies are highly qualified to endorse changes to specific sites based on the data that will hopefully become available this summer. Finally, the draft strategy currently confines the designation process in a few ways, and we would offer a few suggestions on how to create a more open and inclusive process. First, we would like to see the strategy allow any member of the public to bring forward site designation proposals. Our marine resources belong to the public at large, and all members of the public should be eligible to make recommendations on their management through this process. We would also strongly recommend that the strategy include all rocky habitat areas in the designation process, including offshore rocks, reefs, and subtidal habitat. These areas are ecologically connected, and proposals should be able to recognize that interconnectedness. And finally, an OPEC's review process, we view that as the proper time to review proposals and adopt them, not preemptively. Finally, we would also like to concur with the comments of ODFW and support a change in terminology as has been redlined in here from rocky shores to rocky habitat areas to better reflect the scope of the strategy. And with that, I would be happy to take any questions, and hopefully that was clear enough following along the document.
It was. Thank you, Tara. Any comments? Is your card still up from previously?
I'm sorry.
Okay, cool. Just checking. Is your card still up from previously? Yes, it is. Thank you.
This is about your comment about the offshore rocky reefs and islands. You know that those are already part of the National Wildlife Refuges and managed as wilderness areas, and many of them are not open for public use anyway. I mean, what other restrictions or protections would you want to see there?
Thank you for the question. Yes, we are aware that those are under federal management, but I do not believe that precludes the state from also recognizing the importance of those areas, and also those protections only extend to the mean high water line, so the state could consider additional protections below that, as well as adjacent rocky areas. So we'd like to see those included in potential proposal process.
Okay, great, thank you very much. Oh, John, you have a question?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
I did not see your card, I apologize.
I wanted to talk about void impacts. So that would mean no impacts at all, when you're saying avoid impacts?
No, the idea would be to avoid any impacts, not just minimize. So in general, you would like to avoid impacts. If the ability to avoid any impact is not possible, then go to minimize those impacts and then ultimately mitigate if you're not able to minimize. So yes, the default would be to avoid any impacts to Rocky
So
Shores.
that would be, there'd be flexibility, other than banning, human access, you can go to minimize.
I think that the language could be changed to say something along the lines of avoid, minimize, or mitigate, which is pretty common terminology in management.
Yeah, because avoid to me means I can only do that if I ban public access.
We'd like to see some stronger language in there that would at least consider that we are avoiding impacts first and then moving to lesser protections if needed.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, John, I think what she was mentioning here, I mean, there's something called the mitigation hierarchy, and that is the language, which is you strive to avoid impacts first, and if you can't do that, then you try and minimize the impacts, and if you can't do that, then you mitigate the impacts. And that's very common in a lot of state and federal policies, statutes, regulatory, so I think that's what she's referencing, is moving it up just one notch, or even mentioning, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but she meant all three. That way you're kind of marching down a process potentially.
Yes, thank you. And also just on the, sorry, I think it was policy I, currently it only has that agencies shall consider the long-term conservation, and we would like to see that, not just a consideration of that, but actually then avoiding impacts to the Rocky Shores. So that's where that was coming in.
So we're gonna move on because we do have time this afternoon in order to address these topics and chat about part 3.
Can I ask a quick clarifying question?
Clarifying question.
You mentioned 2 policies. Was it G and I?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
Next is Joe Liebezeit.
Thank you, Chair Carter and OPAC members. My name is Joe Liebezeit. I'm the staff scientist and conservation manager at Portland Audubon. And on behalf of 9 Oregon Audubon chapters with more than 16,000 members across the state, appreciate the opportunity to comment again. I'll be focusing, like Tara, on the Rocky Shores amendment process. A lot of Audubon members across the state care deeply about the Rocky shorelines and are concerned about their management and protection. And like Tara commented on, although we're pleased to see that there's a mechanism for community members to submit site designation proposals, it's unclear as to why relevant agencies are not formally invited to propose site designations. And I know that's going to be a topic in future discussions. In particular, the mission, for example, the mission of ODFW is to protect and enhance Oregon's fish, wildlife, and their habitats for use and enjoyment by present and future generations. Clearly, ODFW and other relevant agencies that have a similar mandate should employ their in-house expertise and play a key role in the Rocky Shores process by evaluating and proposing site designations based on best available science. A public comment period could easily be incorporated into any agency-led designation proposal. Currently, the community-led process for site designations, as it reads in Appendix I, places a heavy burden on the nominating entity, which we interpret at this point to be the community, individual, or group. And just in contact with coastal Audubon chapters, we have been hearing that this is a heavy lift in small rural communities where volunteers are already overtaxed with many needed community projects. And why not use the state's expertise with natural resources to make site recommendations? So moving forward in the Rocky Shores process, ODFW, perhaps an interagency group or members from the working group could lead a review of the new DLCD Rocky Shores inventory and conduct a formal analysis to identify locations of conservation concern and propose site designations. Secondly, along with what Tara was saying, we urge DLCD to include a management principle and policy to defer to a precautionary approach for site management. I think what Tara said on specifics was already been said, so I won't repeat it. I just want to say that that type of management policy precautionary approach is common in a previous work with ODFW on their forage fish management. That was a standard procedure. We appreciate DLCD's providing eventually an interactive mapping tool and discussions with staff. It sounds like late summer is when that will be coming out. That will facilitate the designation process. We ask that the agency provide all known relevant and up-to-date data layers for ecological human use, climate change, and other vital information. That will be important in making these decisions, and the tool should be easy for members of the public to navigate. We're pleased to see in the most recent red line management document that there's language now in there to include subtitle and rocky reef habitat in the proposal designation. Like Tara Q mentioned, it makes ecological sense to include that. It conforms to what you already have in your management principles, section 2 of ecological units on page 4. We strongly encourage in your subsequent deliberation today to retain this language. We're pleased to see that our recommendation to broaden designation proposal process to all Oregonians is now included in language in the document, and again, we strongly recommend that you, in your deliberation, to include that language. That's it for me. Thanks for the opportunity to provide comments, and looking forward to tracking this process and continuing to provide input. Thank you. Any questions?
I have just one quick question. Did you submit today's comments in writing, or, I mean, we have the previous letter that you submitted.
No, but I can give you this.
That's what I just want to make sure. And same with you, Tara, did you have yours? Just in case we get hung up on a letter, or can you,
I have my chicken scratched, but I'm happy to type it up and send if it's helpful. I can send to something to Andy or Deanna. I'd be happy to.
Deanna's saying they're the same points from your official letter, so we can get it.
I think pretty similar, yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other questions for Joe? All right.
I do have one quick question.
Yes.
Joe, can you repeat your recommendation around, I think an agency recommendation of sorts? You had a specific recommendation.
Regarding the process for agency-led designation?
Yes.
Yeah, I just said that moving forward with the process, perhaps there could be an interagency work group put together, or it could potentially include members of the Rocky Shores work group. I'm not sure. In my discussions with Andy and Deanna, it's unclear exactly how that process will move forward, but if the working group is still in place, perhaps some members of that group could be part of an interagency group that could help lead a review of the DLCD inventory that will be coming out in the next few months, and conduct a formal analysis to identify locations of potential site designations. And then, of course, that would be opened up for a public review.
Got it. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Next on the list, we have Fran Reck.
They don't need to do that. I mean, they will,
Yes.
Morning, Chair, members of OPAC. My name is Fran Recht. I'm the Habitat Program Manager for the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission.
Yeah.
I serve on the Pacific Fisheries Management Council's Habitat Committee, and I also serve through OPAC's appointment, thank you, as a conservation representative on the Ocean Acidification and Hypoxia Council. With the information gained from all these hats, I'm here to ask you to protect kelps, algae, and seagrasses, SAVs, submerged aquatic vegetation, as a default measure that benefits many fish and wildlife species and that will perhaps help buffer for local impacts of ocean acidification and hypoxia to minimize the stress to our fish and shellfish resources, to minimize the stress to our fish and shellfish resources. The policy document is good and has some good language, and I thank everyone on the Rocky Shores working group for the extremely hard work they have put into it. I am concerned, though, that your goals are not likely to be met if you do not extend a protective designation for kelp forests and SAVs seaward to wherever the habitats occur subtidally and around offshore islands, and add or amend a policy that makes this clear. Kelp forests, which depend on rocky substrates, are an essential habitat as designated by the National Marine Fisheries Service and the Pacific Fishery Management Council. They are also considered a habitat of particular concern by NMFS and the Pacific Fishery Management Council. Because of the drag created by the plants, current speed inside a kelp forest is greatly reduced. The calmer environment within the forest, coupled with the habitat complexity, provides a refuge for many fish, as well as invertebrates and marine mammals. Because kelps are primary producers that modify the environment to create suitable habitat for a great diversity of species, they are known as foundational species. Many larval fish, such as eulachon, an important prey species for salmon and many other fish, can survive in this shelter. A single kelp plant has many hundreds of crabs and other invertebrates living on it, and hundreds of fish swimming around it in search of prey. Some of the fish known to make extensive use of this habitat are juvenile coho and Chinook salmon, surf smelt, cabezon, and many juvenile rockfish, including black rockfish, blue rockfish, olive rockfish, and kelp rockfish. I would like to see a policy that makes clear the prohibition of commercial kelp and SAV harvest. Of course, no such designation would affect fishing, it just relates to the plants. But the default should be the protection of these habitats. The Ocean Acidification and Hypoxia Council, which Dr. Braby co-chairs with Dr. Jack Barth, we heard a presentation from Dr. Francis Chan about the scientific panel that he co-chairs with the West Coast Ocean Acidification and Hypoxia Task Force. That science panel is sponsored by OSU's Institute of Natural Resources and the California Ocean Science Trust. In addition to Dr. Chan, this panel has many eminent scientists from Oregon State University who you are familiar with, including Dr. Jack Barth, Dr. Burke Hales, Dr. George Walbusser, and Dr. Waldo Wakefield. In regards to the protection of kelps and submerged aquatic vegetation, the science panel took what they call a no regrets approach, essentially saying that there were so many benefits of protecting kelps and SAVs that while the jury was still out about the potential mitigation benefits of kelps for OA and hypoxia, there wasn't a downside to that protection. Similarly, one of the priority action items of our OAH Council, Dr. Walker is also on. This is the first report to the legislature dated September 15th, 2018. One of the priority action items is action item 3.2A, promote SAV conservation and restoration strategies, an opportunity to achieve short-term buffering, carbon sequestration, and ecosystem services benefits. Additionally, this same action plan recognizes the work of OPAC in its Rocky Shores management. And it says to ensure that OAH adaptation and resilience strategy are incorporated into long-term planning outcomes for Oregon's Rocky Shore management. So my suggestion would be to make things clearer by putting SAV conservation in a separate policy and striking the marine plants reference in policy I. So I would be suggesting that you insert a new policy or add to the end of K related to ocean acidification that the commercial harvesting of kelps and other SAVs are prohibited. And that's the extent of my comments. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Fran. Melissa?
And I just need some quick clarification as well. And thank you, Fran, for your commentary and your recommendations. As far as I know, I believe, in a marine garden designation, which is determined through our territorial sea plan, it is not legal to collect or harvest kelps or algae, so that's correct. Carla's nodding her head. Okay. So currently through the designation of marine garden, which there are 5 along the Oregon coast right now, is that correct? 3 of which maybe are in our marine reserve systems, or 2. I'm sorry that I don't know all these numbers, that it is at this time illegal to collect kelp. Are you looking for further designations of marine garden, or additional marine garden designations?
I think that would occur through the community process in the Rocky Shoreline, but it really needs to, the kelp forests are way beyond just the near shore where the marine gardens are. So it would extend wherever SAVs, kelp forests, and other SAVs exist, whether it's around offshore islands in any Rocky Shore habitat.
And you're looking for that to be included in the territorial sea plan, correct?
Yes, as a separate precautionary and a measure that says, you know, we will not have any commercial harvest of kelp or SAVs for the benefits they provide.
Excellent, I just wanted to clarify,
Mhm.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Great, thank you. Oh, Laurel, you're back to this table.
I was hoping Lisa is going to touch on. So in addition, does this work?
Yep.
Okay, in addition to the marine gardens, it's also prohibited within all the other protected areas. So intertidal research reserve, unless by scientific research permit.
And there's a rule in place now for commercial harvest, generally, more broadly speaking.
For kelp, it would be DSL,
Yes.
and there is.
But I just wanted to recognize there is a rule in place. To Fran's point, she's looking for a policy to support that rule, because right now it's just a rule in the absence of any policy around that. So I think that's what, correct?
That's
Fran?
correct.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fran. Melissa, if you put your tents down, we're gonna have our last person come and testify, Mark Nicholson. Welcome, Mark, thank you for coming.
Thank you, Chair Carter and OPEC members. This will be brief. My name is Mark Nicholson. I'm speaking on behalf of Audubon Society of Lincoln City in support of the red line recommendations that you will be reviewing later today on the Rocky habitat management. We also signed on to the letter mentioned earlier with Portland Audubon in support of those recommendations. I'll say from our perspective, as a coastal Audubon society covering Lincoln County and Tillamook County, we recognize that good, sound coastal ecosystem management is critical to everything we do, and we are strongly supportive of those efforts to develop such guidelines. Our role specifically, we feel, will be to commit to all outreach activities and facilitation of outreach events that will help support in this process. That's it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Mark? Does anyone else wish they had signed up and didn't have the opportunity? Okay. With that, we are actually, I'm gonna just tweak the agenda a teeny bit.